Hey guys, ZKB here, showcasing my HotA Barbarian. We're about to do a tier 55 here, and this build is designed to do tier 50s, tier 55s as fast as possible, just so you guys can speed clear and get as much loot. It's not designed to push up to higher tiers like 75s or 80s, so you'd be wanting to look at a different build guide for that. But if you're looking to get as much loot as possible, in my opinion, the most efficient thing is just speed farming 55s, 50s, so sit back and watch the showcase, and I'll get back to you after this 4-minute run of this dungeon and talk about the gear.
I need time to do. Yet. I need more fury. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I need more time. This way. I'm not ready yet. This way. I'm not ready yet. I'm this way. I'm not ready yet. Not ready yet.
Alright, guys, let's get to talking about gear. And I think it's an important disclaimer to make that we are a speed farming build. This build is designed to speed clear 50s solo, 50s in groups as fast as possible because that's what's going to get you the most upgrades towards your glyphs. It's going to get you the most loot, the most XP. So there is not really a reason to push higher tier nightmare dungeons right now. If you were, you'd want to get rid of some of the movement speed and damage nodes for some more health and survivability. So just thought I'd put that disclaimer out there. So this is what I found works best for me in running speed clear 50s, and I'll talk over the gear. There'll be a build guide down in the description, and it's going to go over all of the stat priorities. It's going to tier them, it's going to prioritize them. So I won't be going into extreme depth. You should be looking at the build guide for the skill tree, the paragon, and the specific tiers of each role. But I'll talk about each piece of gear and why I chose it. So the most important role on helmet is the cooldown reduction. This is going to help us keep our shouts up as much as possible. Maximum Fury is also a great multiplier for us because on HotA we have Hammer the Ancients deals 1% additional damage for each point of Fury you had while using it. So this 21 Max Fury is a very noticeable increase in damage. Life is also a great mod. Moving on to the chest, and I'll go ahead and kind of lump the chest and pants together because you're looking for pretty much the same mods. You're looking for plus ranks to shouts, which is the only different mods that you're going to be looking for. But really, you want as much damage reduction on these two pieces of gear as possible. Damage reduction is going to help you, well, live, and they're extremely underrated mods. And just to basically show you guys how important it is, let me go over a scenario here. Let's say I'm near an enemy that's close. Let's say I'm fortified and the enemy's bleeding. All of these are completely realistic and should be happening to the majority of monsters that I'm facing. So let's say I take 100 and it gets reduced 25% from my damage reduction from close enemies, so it goes down to only dealing 75 damage. Okay, and then it gets reduced by another 20% because I'm fortified, so that goes down another 15, so it goes down to 60 damage. And then instead of taking 60 damage, I'm going to get another 16% reduction because the enemies are bleeding. So that's going to take me down to only taking 50 damage. So basically, these pants are going to make me take half damage, and that is insane for one item slot. You can have a similar chest where you're just taking half damage, and these two are extremely important to survivability. If you're dying a lot, it's likely that you just don't have enough damage reduction mods on your gear. Armor is also extremely important, and that's why we're taking here the aspect of disobedience mod. So it's saying that as long as we're doing enough damage, different types of damage, which the bleeding helps out a lot, we'll eventually stack it 100 times and get up to 50% increased armor. And if you hover over armor, it says right now we're taking reduces physical damage taken from enemies of equal level by 58%. During a dungeon, you'll notice that when your max stacks of your disobedience mod, this number will go to 100%. And so that's mobs of your level, you'll just be completely immune to physical damage. Now, if you're doing higher tier nightmare dungeons, like let's say 70s, you'll still be taking a lot of physical damage. However, this is an insane defensive layer for, if you're fighting mobs of your tier or slightly higher. And the aspect we chose on the chest is this: we get a barrier whenever we hit an elite. And now it helps make us really a little tankier, but that's not the reason why we're taking it. The reason why we're taking it is because we're taking the conceited aspect on our amulet, which is giving us increased damage while we have a barrier active. So that's just going to help us one-shot the elites. We go up, we hit them, we gain a barrier, we deal 38% more damage. We bonk them for, 15 million plus damage. It's going to feel great. Moving on to the gloves. So the most important roles on gloves are plus 3 ranks to HotA, which when you eventually upgrade it, it'll go to plus 4 ranks of HotA. The next most important mod is critical strike chance. This is extremely important to have a high roll because this is the consistency of our build. If we don't crit, we're not going to be doing very much damage, so we want to be critting as much as possible. Other helpful important mods are lucky hit chance and attack speed. And I chose the imprint here where it adds a 50% small little area of effect on Hammer the Ancients, and that's going to help us clear a bit better. It's going to feel great. Moving on to boots, the most important mods are movement speed and fury cost reduction. These are build enabling, and I probably would never run boots that didn't have these two mods. Another important mod that we could have is movement speed after killing an elite. These would help make us run faster and obviously clear the goal. Obviously complete the goal of clearing the dungeon ASAP so we get more loot. And the reason why I chose this imprint is because it's an amazing imprint. We're just gaining more movement speed when we're unstoppable. Again, our rallying cry makes us unstoppable, so we'll be proccing it with a rallying cry. And moving through enemies is a very nice bonus as well. Amulets are probably the most important part of the build. It's extremely important that you have as much cooldown reduction and fury cost reduction as you can on the amulet. Without fury cost reduction as a high roll or without cooldown reduction, our build's going to be feeling terrible. We won't be able to keep our shouts up. We won't have the fury to use HotA. Another important mod that would be really nice to hit is if you also have +2 ranks to all defensive skills, because once upgraded, that'll go to +3, and that gives us +3 all of our shouts, which is a huge amount of bonuses. So that would be the mod I'd look for most after the fury cost reduction and cooldown reduction. And let's talk about rings. So the ideal mods you want on a ring is critical strike chance, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, and resource generation. A lot of our damage in HotA is tied to us using HotA on maximum fury. So as much resource generation is going to give it, like, it'll keep us at that max fury more often. As you can see, this is a really good ring. It has all the mods I want. And for the aspects, we're looking at the mandatory aspects for rings for every single barbarian build. It's just the shouts generate fury per second, and the shouts have lower cooldown per nearby enemy, up to 6 seconds. Alright, so let's talk about weapons. And it's important to understand what a stat stick is. So all of our damage is going to be coming from using Hammer of the Ancients, which as you can see is tied to my bludgeoning weapon, which means we won't be using any of these offhand weapons. So the most important thing for our offhand weapons is that they're swords, because they have the critical strike damage implicit. So we want swords for the offhand, and the most important rolls are, this is an ideal sword. We want critical strike damage, core skill damage, vulnerable damage, and strength. So this has all 4 of the most important mods. The imprint I chose for the two-hand slashing weapon was skills deal 40% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast. So essentially, when we have maximum fury and we cast HotA, we'll be dealing 40% more damage. The aspect we chose for one of the offhands is if we ever generate fury above max, it'll make our next core skill deal up to 30% increased damage. And then the next aspect we chose for our other offhand is critical strikes with core skills, which, remember, we're almost always critical striking. Increase our attack speed by 25%. It'll make the build feel a lot more smoother having this aspect on. And the aspect for the two-hand weapon here is going to be you deal 80% increased damage to stun enemies. So the combo is we run up to an elite, we use ground stomp to stun them, and then we get an 80% damage multiplier. Also, just in our skill tree, we have a 45% chance to stun when using a two-handed bludgeoning weapon, which we are. So since HotA has a 50% lucky hit proc, 50% of the time we'll proc a lucky hit, and then 45% of that time when we do hit a lucky hit, we'll be stunning the enemies. So we'll get some residual benefits of this stun even without using ground stomp. Alright, let's move on to talking about the skill tree. And this is the speed farming variant of the skill tree that I'm on right now. So I'll just go over, again, everything will be down in the description. There'll be a build guide that showcases everything. Important things are we're only taking 1 in challenging shout because we don't really need the extra little bit of damage reduction for speed clearing. We're going to be taking these movement speed nodes because we want to run as fast as possible. Remember to always take hamstrings, that way our bleeds are applying the slow effects. And we'll be taking these big damage nodes down here. Now, if you wanted to push higher tier nightmare dungeons, you'd want to respec your skill tree, and you'd want to be cutting the damage nodes. So you'd cut 2 of them here, you'd cut these 2, you'd cut these 3, you'd move all these movement speed nodes off, and you'd want to be putting points into challenging shouts, into imposing presence, into martial vigor, into defensive stance, and you could even consider moving some off rallying cry and putting some more and some defensive ones like aggressive resistance. But I don't want to go too much into talking about the nightmare version of the builds, because this is the speed farming like tier 50, not the pushing 75 plus build. Alright, and let's talk about the Paragon now. So Paragon's, disclaimer, I'm not sure if I have the complete optimal Paragon board, and I'm not sure if any build ever will. because there's so much variety and there's so much differences you can do depending to your build, what thresholds you're wanting. So I'm just going to go over the most important things, which are the glyphs. And since I'm level 100, I have access to all the skill points, and I can put the glyphs in their best positioning to where they get the most multipliers. However, if you're a lower level, you're going to want to prioritize certain glyphs, and that glyph priority is first you're going to want exploit, and the next you're going to want martial here, and the third you're going to want disembowel for the cooldown reduction. Again, as you can see, we're prioritizing first the damage of vulnerable, and the cooldown reduction of martial, and the cooldown reduction of disembowel. And then you're going to want wrath, mainly for just their critical strike damage, but you also get a little bit of fury, which is nice. And then finally, the last glyph you'll add is territorial, just for a little bit of damage resistance and damage. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the Paragon tree, the reasons why I chose these nodes. So it's important to get your build online as fast as possible, to be getting all of these maximum fury and fury on kill nodes. You'll also want these maximum fury nodes up here, again, to increase HotA's damage. This Warbringer node is amazing. We're going to be at max fortify for the entire dungeon, mainly just from this. These movement speed nodes help us a lot. Remember, our goal is to speed clear, and moving faster is one of the number one ways we can increase our clear speed. We get some vulnerable damage on this board, and here. Killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant berserking for 5 seconds. So we're going to be taking this sword expertise, so all of our abilities will be bleeding. We'll be causing enemies to bleed. So we will be having good uptime in berserking, which is more movement speed, more damage. It's going to help us clear faster. And if you want kind of like a more full explanation of all of the glyphs and what we're taking in the Paragon board, just click the link in the description, the build guide. It's going to help you guys out a lot. If I make any updates to the build, I can just quickly change the Paragon there. And that's pretty much all I want to talk about. So I just like to wish you guys a well on bonking your enemies for 15 million damage with HotA, and have lots of fun speed clearing those dungeons, guys.